You ever have one of those months where it feels like your reading list was picked by 5 different people? That was my September. A few books made me laugh. Some actually got me choked up, and one may have made me into a sci-fi fan, which honestly, I didn't know was possible. My name's Topher. Welcome to the library. Let's dig in. I started the month with not one, but 2 Brandon Sanderson novels. And when you hear which ones I started with, I know you're going to be like, but that's not really Brandon Sanderson. You got to start with Mistborn or The Way of the Kings. I get it. And look, I'll read them eventually, but they're really long and really involved series. So I was happy to start with Tress of the Emerald Sea. And I got to be honest, it was freaking delightful. I mean, you definitely saw the influences of like The Princess Bride and Bad Omens, and I even think The Wizard of Oz. But it was, I don't know, it was one of those books that just kind of reminded you why you like stories, which I'm always a big fan of. And I think Tress herself was just a really endearing character. Like she had a silent strength about her. She was kind, she was generous. She didn't give up. She didn't let her circumstances dictate her life. And it was just like a kind of a madcap adventure through a really fun and interesting world. Actually, the side characters, a bunch of oddballs and different things like that also worked really well. And I thought it was interesting because it kind of reminded me or made me think of what would have happened if the Goonies kids all grew up and they decided to stay on One-Eyed Willie's ship and became pirates. That's kind of the vibe I got sometimes, and maybe that's just a me thing. But yeah, Tress of the Emerald Sea, loved it. Really, really enjoyed it. And then right after that, I read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, another one of Brandon Sanderson's Secret Project books. And this one I thought was very different. It definitely had like some fun anime vibes and romance, and there was like big themes of being able to find beauty in darkness. And again, it was also a super imaginative, well thought out world, and the 2 primary protagonists were really engaging. And I love the undercurrents of just like this idea that creativity isn't just about expression, it's really about freedom almost, right? And being able to find beauty even in those dark moments of life. I will say the tone was so different from Tress that reading it right after the other one, it didn't land as well. I think I'm probably in the minority when I look at reviews and stuff. Most people like Yumi better than Tress. I mean, they're always really close. I preferred Tress over Yumi, but it might have just been because of the point or order in which I read it. But either way, you can't go wrong. And I am excited to finally begin to read more Brandon Sanderson, so we will see where that leads. Then I made a pretty sharp left turn, and I read something a lot more deep and thoughtful and pensive. I read Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. Memorial Days, although not a very long book, is one that is definitely going to stay with you. It is really an observation on grief, and it definitely hits. I got choked up multiple times. Geraldine Brooks writes with such clear vulnerability about the loss of her husband that it's really difficult for you not to imagine or remember things that you have lost in your own life, whether that's a friend or a family member or even a pet. The way in which she describes the reality of mourning, particularly in Western culture, really highlighted how bad we are at it, is the only way I know how to say it. Sometimes I think we treat mourning and grieving as if it's an interruption rather than something that's just completely normal and human that we should be able to do and be able to do freely. And so this kind of memoir, this reflection on grief, is really her story as she navigates how often she tried to push the grief away and the loss away to when she finally allowed herself to just feel it all and to remember everything and to not dive deep and wallow, but to also remember all the good stuff that came with her husband and how hard that is to balance sometimes. I will say, as someone with a pretty deep faith, I found myself reminded of why I'm grateful kind of for the hope that I have. But even if you don't believe anything like that, or you have a different belief system or way that you kind of view the world, I think this book highlights incredibly well just the value and importance of loving well and living life to the fullest, to really just enjoy every moment that you can with the people around you and be able to express that love. Strangely, this book actually tied in a way that I would have never expected to the next book that I read. which is called The Fisherman. The Fisherman is ultimately a story about grief wrapped in, I would say, myth. It's actually cosmic horror, which I've never read a cosmic horror story before. I do enjoy horror novels. And it was really interesting to kind of see the parallels of some of the stuff that Geraldine Brooks was talking about on Memorial Day, is very heavy and kind of these big thoughts on grief and mourning, and then see how that shows up in a cosmic horror story like The Fisherman. In the story, you follow two men, both widowers, as they are dealing with their own grief and their own processes, and they begin to hear stories about a great fishing place called Dutchman's Creek. But Dutchman's Creek is definitely not what they expect it to be. There's a little bit of a story within a story element to this that kind of unravels some of the dark history of Dutchman's Creek. And the whole vibe of this book is, the best way to describe it is if you were on a porch with like your grandfather or some old coot telling big fishing stories, right? But then as he continues to tell the story, things begin to get weirder and darker, and you start to see this theme of mourning and loss, but also sometimes the things that you get back are not necessarily the things that you want to get back. And I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't say more than that. This isn't a perfect horror novel by any stretch of the imagination. It was good and I enjoyed it. I don't regret reading it at all. But more than anything, it just kept reminding me this idea of how often we can get trapped either by not grieving at all and all the things that kicks up in us, or by grieving so much and never being able to move forward that we almost imprison ourselves in our own emotions. So if you like cosmic horror and you've never read The Fisherman, I'd definitely give it a go. Now, before we get to some of the books that surprised me most, I want to do just a quick rapid fire of some of the other books that I read, just to kind of work through them real quick, and I'll show them on the screen and some of the book information. First up was Wyrd Sisters by Terry Pratchett. Wyrd Sisters was my first Discworld book, and it definitely won't be my last. It was weird, and it was witty, and it was charming, and the world building was really cool. I would have loved if there were actually chapters. I don't write in books or anything like that, so not having chapters to where I could put my bookmark or receipt or whatever I'm using to mark my spot, I just kept forgetting where I left off. So that was a little bit of a bummer. But I definitely see the appeal of Terry Pratchett's work. It was, yeah, I don't know, it was fun, and I definitely get the appeal. I look forward to reading more in the Discworld series. I read Dad is Fat by Jim Gaffigan. If you know Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, you know what you're going to get. Like, it's funny, it's charming, it's relatable. If you're a parent, you're going to be reminded of a whole lot of different things, and you're going to laugh a lot. If you're not a parent, you're going to understand quickly why most parents believe that sleep is just a myth. And you may go, maybe I don't ever want to be a parent. Who knows? It was funny. It was a good time. It was a good palate cleanser after a cosmic horror book and a deep thinking book on grief. So it was nice to kind of have something to lift me out a little bit of the funk that I kind of started to feel myself being pulled into. I read Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, the sequel to Red Rising. That's the second book in the first Red Rising trilogy. I know that he wrote more. And if you've watched my other videos or seen my reviews on Fable, you know I was not particularly impressed or engaged that much with Red Rising. I'm very happy to say that Golden Sun was everything that I had hoped Red Rising was going to be. It's to the point that I would almost say you don't have to read Red Rising. You do, because there's not really any kind of character condensing at the beginning of Golden Sun to kind of give you some background information. But Golden Sun just works. It works on every level. The politics, the character development is way better. They stand out more. The twists, the turns, it's much more engaging. So I was really pleasantly surprised that Golden Sun kind of followed through on its promise that I've heard from so many people. So I am going to read the third book and finish out the first part of the trilogy. Not sure if I'll read the second trilogy that continues in this world and follows Darrow's story, but I am glad that I read Golden Sun, and it kind of redeemed the Red Rising experience for me. I read Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang, and I'm not going to say much about that book other than I really enjoyed it. I've already kind of talked about it in another video. I have a series called This or That where I look at two books of a similar genre that carry similar themes and ask the question, if you could only choose one, whether that's because of time or money, Which should you choose? And I talk a lot about that book, but I really did enjoy it. I thought Emma Wang did a fantastic job in her world building. The magic system was really cool. But you could go ahead and check out that video if you're interested to hear more of my thoughts on Blood Over Brighthaven. Now let's get to the books that surprised me most. And I want to start with a book about ambition, wonder, and NASA. I read Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I gotta be honest, I never in my life thought that I would read a Taylor Jenkins Reid novel, not because I have anything against her as an author. I don't know if I'm really her core audience, which is fine, but so many of my female friends have just devoured all of her books, and so I asked them, which one should I read? If I'm going to read one, what should I read? And they all know I'm an 80s kid, fully indoctrinated into NASA. Like, I just love everything about it. One of my favorite movies when I was a kid was Space Camp. If you haven't seen it, golden. And so, yeah, I gave it a shot. And I was pleasantly surprised. I don't know if I had high expectations or not. I think I went in pretty neutral, but I enjoyed it. It really has two different kind of timelines that's happening. You have one timeline that's happening with kind of the mission prep and the astronaut training, and you see kind of the misogyny and racism that just really still existed within NASA in the 80s, as well as burgeoning love stories and different things like that. And then the second timeline is really what's going on once the mission is in play and astronauts are in space and the things that go wrong and how people are responding. And that back and forth, I don't think I realized until this book how much I enjoy that kind of narrative framing. Like, it just helps me be really glued to the story because I want to know what's going to continue to happen next. The subtitle of this book is a love story, and there's definitely a love story amongst humans in it, which is fine. I wasn't that intrigued by it, but I would argue that there is a second love story, and I'm assuming that Taylor Jenkins Reid did this intentionally, and that's the love story of people's desire to go to space, to do the impossible, and everything that had to do with NASA and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to achieve things that very few people ever have. And that part I definitely connect with and I really enjoyed. But I will be 100% honest, the last chapter and a half of that book, I almost needed tissues. The way in which Reid kind of wraps everything up or brings everything to a conclusion, she hits such relatable and deep emotional notes that I don't think I was ready for. And so next to Geraldine Brooks' Memorial Days, which makes sense, I found myself with a lump in my throat as I was finishing this book, which again, I just wasn't expecting. And that led me to one of my favorite genre mashups of the year. Do you know what sound I hate more than anything else in the world? Chainsaws and leaf blowers. I hate them so very much. So I apologize if you hear leaf blowing in the back. Anyway, my favorite mashup genre of the year is A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett, which is a follow-up to one of my favorite books that I read earlier this year, The Tainted Cup. This book takes everything I loved about the first one and clicks it up another notch. The blend of detective story and fantasy world building shouldn't make sense in my brain as much as it does. He does such a good job of world building. All these like obscure, strange, like just interesting bits and pieces of history that make the entire world feel so lived in and almost ancient. And yet you've got these great mystery tropes like Sherlock and Holmes or Agatha Christie, and they just blend so well together. I am enjoying this series of books so much. I hope he continues to write these. And I will say, I don't know if you necessarily need to read the first book to read the second. You'll definitely have, context of the characters and stuff, but he does a really good job of kind of reestablishing the characters at the beginning of the second book. But if you like fantasy, if you like mystery, what are you doing with your life? You gotta be reading these books. Unless, I will say this, if you don't like stories that have crass humor in it, you may not like these, because the humor can get a little bit crass. It pushes up against kind of my line of what I'm usually comfortable with. But if you can handle it and it doesn't bother you that much, just read them. Like, you're gonna like it, I promise. I don't know anyone that has read these books that don't like it. But the biggest surprise for me this month was that I read a book that legitimately has me rethinking my opinions on sci-fi. I've said it before, I'm not necessarily a sci-fi guy. I have nothing against it. I mean, I love Star Wars, the movies, and all different things like that. And I like sci-fi like in the vein of Jurassic Park. But generally speaking, I've never been drawn to sci-fi, and I can't really decide why. I've never been able to put my finger on it. But I think that has changed because of the book Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. The way the story unfolds, it feels like part memoir, part myth, part confession, part adventure, part philosophical treatise of the human condition. You follow the story of a man named Hadrian who doesn't try and pretend his family doesn't exist, but definitely tries to extricate himself or extract himself from his family and his family's history. And kind of he takes off, and you kind of follow the story from there. And the thing that I found so fascinating is that this character is a really fully realized character and with a lot of depth and complexity. And because of his station of privilege, it would be really easy for Rocchio to make him as that character where nothing ever goes wrong and everything works out well for him. And that is nearly the complete opposite. One of the most fascinating things about this book to me was how often his good intentions kept just blowing up in his face, and he'd have to deal with his consequences. Another thing that impressed me so much wasn't necessarily the size and scope of the world, although that is quite impressive. I mean, there's kind of time jumps, there's multiple worlds, there's different alien races. But one of the other things that impressed me so much was the questions that it inevitably brings up. I found myself asking questions like, what does progress really cost? What happens when our ideals outgrow our reality? How do you stop faith and governments from being corrupted and being used as a cudgel? How do you live with stories that people tell about you that are no longer true, but it's just based on their perception? How do you respond to the consequences of your actions? These were just some of the questions that naturally bubbled up from this story. It's not a perfect book. There are certain points that certainly drag. It probably could have been a little tighter. But honestly, I didn't mind, because I was so engaged with the world building and the story and at least a good portion of the characters and the questions that just kept popping up that I was in. By the end, I wasn't just thinking about space and alien races and war and all the complexities that comes with that. I was thinking about legacy and how our beliefs shape the way that we act or respond to the world around us, and the long shadows that are cast by our choices. For a debut, it's remarkable to me that Christopher Rocchio was able to accomplish as much as he did in this story. And I already have the second book, and I can't wait to read it. There's 7 books in total. I think the 7th one comes out this November. I know I'm not going to be able to read through all of them by the time that one comes out. But if he continues to build on what he's already done in this first book, I definitely have a feeling this may end up being one of my favorite series of all time, which is mind-boggling to me that I'm saying that about a sci-fi series. But the jury's still out, so as I read them, I'll definitely let you know. After that, all the space and complexity and politics that came with Empire of Silence, I decided to return to something that is a little bit more familiar to me and helps me remind myself of why I love children's literature. I read The Poison King by Katherine Rundell, which is a follow-up to Impossible Creatures that came out last year. And honestly, it's nothing short of magical. Rundell writes with such imagination and warmth that even as an adult, you are reminded as to why you fell in love with stories in the first place. And what she understands and accomplishes so deftly that oftentimes many people forget is that children's literature isn't meant to protect children from the truth. It's meant to help them face it and navigate it. She trusts her readers, young and old, to hold joy and sorrow in the same hand. In some ways, it reminds me of the movie Inside Out. Very different, obviously, but what Inside Out does in that film of wrestling with the complex emotions and not only trusting that kids can handle it, but that adults will be reminded of fundamental truths, is still the reason why that movie, I think, is one of the best Pixar movies ever made. Katherine Rundell is able to do something similar in this book as Inside Out did, as well as what she did in the first Impossible Creatures book, where everything is so imaginative and engaging and you want to follow the story, but it's also dealing with deep things like grief and loss and sorrow and resilience. And above all else, the fragile belief that no matter what, light and goodness are still worth chasing. Reading it, I couldn't help but think of stories from my own childhood that kind of helped shape me a little bit. Stories like Winnie the Pooh or The Hobbit or Narnia or even Charlotte's Web. And I honestly think Rundell stands in that same lineage. This isn't just a book for children. It's a book for anyone who wants to be reminded of the power of story and be reminded of some of those fundamental truths. Those truths that sometimes get lost in the complexity and chaos of the everyday, or all the different world events, or the political nature that seems to embed everything in our lives. I truly believe that if Rundell continues at this depth and level with these stories, her books are going to stand the test of time, which is why it was my favorite book that I read in September. So that's it. Those are the 12 books I read in September. Some made me laugh, some got me choked up, some reminded me why I love reading in the first place. October is already looking spooky and strange and full of surprises, so keep an eye on my channel for some of the books that I'm reading and some of my thoughts, as well as a few kind of video essays that I'm working on that I'm pretty excited about. Until next time, stay curious, read deeply, and I'll see you in the library.